Dr. Shore, I know you are very active in the clinical research world, and again, we have a number of therapies that are approved in a certain disease state. We have a number of agents that are still under investigation. If you had to design a perfect clinical trial looking at the various phases, the continuum of prostate cancer, how might that trial look?
Wow, that is a very, very challenging question because of so many things that have happened. Historically now, the FDA and EMA approve therapeutics in the advanced prostate cancer arena, the CRPC arena, really based on one metric, and that's overall survival, or really on one endpoint, overall survival. Denosumab and zoledronic acid, the anti-resorptive therapies, were approved based on delay in skeletal-related events. And though they were not approved based upon overall survival benefit, but all the other therapies we've talked about today, Sipuleucel-T, docetaxel, abiraterone, enzalutamide, cabazitaxel, have all been approved on phase 3 trials where the endpoint was overall survival. The challenge right now in our trial landscape is we're somewhat of a victim of our own success. So number one, what's happening is it's always easier to trial a therapy against placebo. Well, one can do that when there really wasn't much else to offer patients. But from an equipoise standpoint, one has to acknowledge and have a full discussion with a patient whether they're in the post-chemo or in the pre-chemo setting of all approved therapies. So right now we have 3 or 4 approved therapeutic agents post-docetaxel. And in pre-docetaxel, we have Sipuleucel-T. We're soon potentially going to have abiraterone, and then we'll soon have others as well. So it makes the endpoint of survivability as the primary endpoint quite difficult. Many trials are using what are called co-primary endpoints, overall survival plus PFS, or progression-free survival. It makes it more challenging in terms of the biostatistical power of these studies. The long and short of that comment is you typically have to have way many more patients, a bigger numerator, which requires more time and more expense, and it makes it more challenging to reach your endpoints. Many in the advanced prostate cancer world are trying to have further discussions about other endpoints beyond overall survival, whether it's bone metastasis-free survival going from M0 CRPC to M1, meaning if you have no radiographic evidence of disease, delaying the onsets of developing bone metastases. Others have looked at endpoints of going from being androgen sensitive to castration resistant. We've talked about that as a potential trial endpoint. But we have to get agreement from the FDA, because in all fairness to whether it's an industry-sponsored trial or a cooperative group, you're asking an enormous amount of commitment of trial sites, more importantly patients, giving up their time, their family, their lives, as well as the expense. So we need to do better in terms of finding both validated biomarkers in addition to radiographic evidence of disease to help us get endpoints other than just survival. I will say we had an interesting experience with a phase 3 trial where we looked at denosumab in the M0 to M1 CRP space. It was called the Amgen 147 trial. And we completed it, roughly a little over 700 patients in each arm getting denosumab monthly versus a placebo for patients who were true M0s. And it showed a delay, a statistically significant improvement in the delay of bone metastases. Unfortunately, the FDA felt that it wasn't clinically significant. And there are some complications to why they thought that. And there's some issues regarding the overall follow-up in the trial design. But just the mere fact that we have a study that showed a statistically significant delay in bone metastasis-free survival, and it was not approved by the FDA, I know is disconcerting, especially when we went back and we looked at some post hoc analyses, and we found that looking at some of these patients who had rapid progression of disease based upon rapid PSA doubling times, that the delay of bone metastasis was even better. So we need to be smarter, and we need to really have better levels of communication, I think, with the FDA and the European Medical Authority as well in how we design our trials, both at the beginning and both at the end. We need to have better understanding of trials to prevent patients converting from being androgen sensitive to castration resistant. Patients don't die of PSA elevation. Patients die of tumor burden. And typically 90% of patients or more have bone metastases, and a very significant percentage, by the time they are truly finding to succumb of advanced prostate cancer, a significant percentage will also have soft tissue and visceral metastases. So if we can prevent that for as long as possible, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about making advanced prostate cancer a chronic disease. And all in all, it has to be with tolerable therapies. So designing these trials, getting back to your question, very complicated. One has to have an understanding of what your endpoint is and what the regulatory agencies will agree with.